Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about Competency-Based Education 101. I'm Shauna Stefanchik, President and founder of Step Up Consulting. And today's session will be very brief. I know many of you are busy. Time change has not been kind to us this week, so we don't have a lot of people hopping on the call. But this is a really important topic as the state of Missouri has been talking about the possibility for even us in the next 2 or 3 years to become a competence-based education state. So we felt it important to just start doing little blurbs to make sure that school and instructional leaders are aware of what that is. And you'll see more opportunities coming from us to take a deeper dive in your own learning. But again, we're just trying to be a hub of getting out some of this key information and giving you a little overview today. So that's what today's presentation is. So for this CBE, because we don't have enough acronyms in education, so Competency-Based Education 101, here are the goals of the call today. And again, it's going to be very brief, just a high-level overview. I'm going to give you some recommended reads to dive a little bit more into it. We'll talk a little bit about the history of it, some foundational components that you need to have in place, and just some suggested next steps from our company to your district over the next few years to be considering as we go toward this transition. So why is our state even talking about competency-based education? It is an innovative approach. You're going to hear it synonymously. Sometimes it's called competency-based personalized learning. It values personalized learning and growth for students. So rather than we are kind of doing a one-stop shop, expecting everyone to learn the same, competency-based learning is an innovative approach that really values the personalized learning and growth of every student, which you have seen and heard about the federal grant our state has gotten to revise state assessments, and that the assessment is going to become more growth-based. So rather than just taking it one time a year, we're going to start seeing that state assessment happening in the fall, possibly in the winter, and then in the spring, because the state is even, and you would have to change your assessment, which is another reason why my crystal ball says that we're going to competency-based learning, because the state is even shifting how they do assessments, and we're going to growth measures. So rather than comparing this year's cohort to last year's cohort for MPI, they're really going to be looking at the same class. How did the kids start and where did the kids end? And you have noticed with MSIP 6 that we can start getting some MPI points for that continuous improvement. So a lot of times we didn't get more MPI points until we moved them out of a band, right? Below basic would have to move to basic, and basic to proficient. And that still counts for MPI, but now we're going to get some points if you had a below basic student who maybe didn't quite make it to the basic band, but they showed growth within it, then we'll be able to start getting points for that. So again, this system of competency-based learning, it values how students are actually growing, which as educators, we wouldn't argue with, right? That's been one of the things that we've been frustrated is that we are moving these kids, but they were only really giving us credit for kids who are on grade level. This is now a shift where no, we want to look where a student came from, and we're going to give credit, and we want to just move them along that continuum. You've heard, again, another acronym here, Student Success Ready Networks. There's many districts engaging in this group. I think they've been going on since 2020, possibly. I know certainly since 21, where the state has, I think they're on the 3rd task or work group, the Student Success Ready Networks, where they're really diving into what competency-based learning is. Some districts have already started piloting it to see how that's going to go for our state. And they've been doing some professional development and learning around this concept. At the end of this call, I have the link to that, and we'll put that in the notes when we share this video, so you could access everything that those groups have been exposed to And that might certainly, they're still accepting applications if other schools want to be part of those networks. So again, our state is seriously investigating, piloting this idea. And if you hear that Student Success Ready Network, SSRN, that's what that's in response to. And again, I just predict that shift for our state in the next 3 to 4 years would be my guess based on things that are happening. Some recommended reads from me personally, and this will be great when we post this video. If you have other great reads or you're part of this Student Success Ready Network and they've recommended other things, please put that in the comments as we're all on this journey together. But the 2 books that I would recommend, and I'm basically giving you a little synopsis today from this one on the left, Personalized Competency-Based Education, a Marzano publication. This is not a new concept. And so I'm going to be doing some highlights from this book. And then I have not dived all the way in, but this is another one on my list that I'm going through, is Deeper Competency-Based Learning with Karen Hess. She has been a leader in proficiency scale development for quite a while. So I definitely, I just went to my most trusted authors and researchers and looked at what texts they have up. So these are the recommended reads we would have for you. And as a leadership team, again, what we're trying to do as a company is we're reading, we're going and observing schools across the state who are doing this, and we're just trying to bring that learning back to you. So I will be summarizing a lot of things from this handbook of personalized learning today. And that is where I got this definition. There are multiple definitions of competency-based learning, and I stole this one from the book. It's from the International Association for K-12. They talk about, there's 4 big things that students are advancing upon mastery, advance upon demonstrated mastery, right? So we have these competencies, which in our state, I think this is where we're going to see that connection of the priority standards. It is my prediction that and it better be, I'm going to be very upset that these priority standards we have identified are going to become these competencies at every grade level that we want students to master. So we're wanting to see students, because the competencies are probably very tightly going to be aligned to those priority standards. So they can include explicit, measurable, transferable learning. The goal is to empower students in their own learning. Assessment is meaningful and a positive learning experience. So maybe that's even why the state is trying to shift how they do assessment. That you've heard the terms assessment of learning and assessment for learning. And in this theory, we're getting away of, these big evaluate and all these other big measures like how are you doing, but it doesn't really impact the needle as far as what are we teaching. We're constantly assessing their learning rather than of their learning, rather than for their learning, which is more what this model is about. Is we're assessing along the way because we want to see where you're at in that competency continuum. We want to give you feedback and keep moving you along. So it's a big shift, and the one that it should be for assessment, because we've really swung the other way where we're constantly assessing where they are in learning, and then that's taking away instruction time, and we're not using that to push their learning. And last, students receive rapid differentiated support based on their individual learning needs. So again, you're going to hear this term competency-based learning synonymous with personalized learning, because it's really looking at each student's growth and where they're at, which if you think of systemically how we set up schools, we're really going to need to think outside of the box. We put kids by age and assume that age is the determiner for their ability. And those of us in the field can quickly say that is not. So that's one of the things with this shift. And I'm not going to get really deep into the how today, but things that I grapple with as a consultant of as we move to this, what untraditional and innovative ways will we need to set up our classrooms and our grouping of students to make this happen if it's personalized, because it's very different than how we do things now. A history of CBE. The concept is actually in the book, they talk about things of around the 1900s were emerging around this, but it really, I'm using the term reemerged around 2014 I'm putting some leading organizations here. These are people that I've kind of looked into. The Aurora Institute has really helped on the East Coast, helps ship states model. So our company is going to some of their trainings, looking at things they are putting on. But these would be all lead organizations in competency-based learning that you could research. And the leading states in CBE work have been New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, and Colorado got stuck on the end there. Colorado is the closest, so they do have a school where you can go and observe, and our company is going to be doing that as well. But these are the states, if we're wanting to know more what that looks like, sounds like, that have their whole state, and like what our state is considered to do, has gone to this competency-based education model. So those, to me, are exemplars and pillars of people that we'd want to be looking to, of how did they do this transition. And again, the Student Success Ready Network, I think, I'm hoping, I have applied to be a part of that. We'll see if our company gets in and what they're sharing with states, but I'm sure that they're hopefully looking at these models, because we want to look at who's been doing it. But the concept itself has been around for a long time and has really reemerged since 2014. And there are many schools following suit. And now I think Missouri being one as well. So what are, as I've read through the text, and again, I'm really going to be summarizing, I really dove into Marzano's work of it. What are the foundational steps that districts really need to take? And it comes down to, what are those competencies going to be? And I really think in our state, that's where those priority standards we've developed are going to come from. So here are foundational steps that would need to be in place. So again, I think we have about 2 to 4 years to get ready for that. So this is just to get your mind thinking about your school system and what are these foundational things we would need to have in place to be ready for this transition. And one, we have to know what those priority standards and competencies are, K-12. I think our state has given us those, but that is certainly a foundational piece in this model. We have to know what the competencies are. We have to know the measurement topics in those competencies. So as you list out all those competencies, K through 12, what are the common themes or topics that are being covered K through 12? And you can see I put in red here, which to me, that becomes your vertical progressions. What are these big topics we're covering? And then how do those competencies build K through 12 over time? If we're not setting up by age and we really want to look at a student's competency, we have to know when a student comes in, and let's use summarizing, for instance. Where are you on the summarizing continuum as a 9-year-old? Are you operating as a 3rd grade 9-year-old, or are you operating more on a kindergarten or maybe on a 5th grade? In order to see where they are on that learning continuum of the topic, we're going to need vertical progressions of how those competencies and standards build, so we can even see the starting place for a student. And I'm going to walk through some examples of these. Once you have those measurement topics and you've identified your standards, you've come up with what are the major topics that we cover through those, then you're going to start unwrapping each one of those standards. We all love unwrapping. Larry Ainsworth, if you haven't done a lot of work on that, he's a key leader in the field of the process of unwrapping with his book in Power Standards. But Ainsworth has some great things, and there's other, I'm trying to think, Heidi Hayes Jacob probably has some things with unwrapping standards as well. And Karen Hess has done a lot of this work. When you unwrap is when we start really digging into that standard. What does it look like, sound like to be proficient? So notice next to it, I have proficiency scales. In order to truly understand the standards, we need to have a proficiency scale to say, what does the standard mean? And then in his book, Marzano talks about, and I think this is very much needed, determining the cognitive skills needed to master those competencies. So we can know the standard all day long, but as educators, in order to move kids in personalized and competency-based learning, we need to understand what cognitive thinking skills are needed for this student to be proficient in this standard. And so I put proficiency scales here. Everything in red is like my practical application of like, what does that mean? You know, theories that's one of the trademarks of our company. We try to give you all the research, but then just tell you how. Like, what does that mean in practice? So to me, if you're determining cognitive skills, I would have that show up in your proficiency scales, helping teachers see here are the cognitive, and he dives a lot of it, even the metacognitive skills that students are going to need to know in order to master those standards. And then last is students are going to need clarity of competencies. So what does that mean? We're going to need student scales. Once teachers are really clear on those competencies, how to determine where students are on that scale and how to determine if they're proficient, they're also going to need to communicate that to students, because we know that there's so much power. And you're hearing a lot across the state at the Powerful Learning Conference and at the recent Elementary Principals Conference I went to, we're hearing a lot about student-empowered learning. Here's my caveat and caution with that. Yes, student clarity, of course, is very important. But teacher clarity precedes student clarity. Just like teacher learning precedes student learning, teacher clarity precedes student clarity. So don't jump too quickly to student clarity, because I'm seeing, and this is my own soapbox and opinion, but I'm seeing some districts jumping right into the student clarity piece. Well, we need to make sure that teachers are clear on what those competencies are first to make sure of this alignment piece. And so the biggest piece for me, again, in our company as well, because we take a bit of a disruptor approach in some of this work, but I think the key here is the alignment of our idea of proficiency to the state. Everybody can unwrap a standard and still choose a lower level test question, right? So we've got to really be, when you're engaging in all this work, thinking, what does our state has come up with our priority standards? We want to know, what does our state say is proficient? How would they unwrap? And we're going to need these other things. So let me walk you through these foundational steps. When we talk measurement topics, here's an example of this. Here's some examples of some vertical progressions, and the measurement topics are number sense and operations in base 10, relationships and algebraic thinking. And so you can see in this big topic that you would then have a vertical progression for place 10, comparing numbers, operations. These larger topics we want to be able to see. So those would be your big topics, and like subtopics that come underneath them. And let me skip ahead here and show you an example of, well, maybe I didn't open one here. I wanted to show you of a vertical progression, but once you have these measurement topics, we need to know for comparing numbers, what does that look like in kindergarten through 12th grade? So each one of these big topics, we need to understand, where do students fall on that continuum. So this would be your first step. Now that we know the state has released those priority standards, is diving through those and figuring out what are the big measurement topics. This is just a screenshot of our vertical progression organizer to show you here are the measurement topics we found in math. So then once you do that, now we're talking about unwrapping standards. Okay, so I've got a standard at the top comparing two fractions. So here's a 3.0, how an example of how a teacher could unwrap that. And I like this. Of course, this is used in our product, so I'm showing you some examples. If you're a district with a large amount of staff and you want to engage in this work in the next couple of years, I'm just trying to give you some examples of what that could look like, sound like. So we would unwrap that standard. It's really talking about comparing fractions with the same numerator or denominator, and they want students to be able to use symbols and justify the solution. And then I like on this specific one, it says, for examples. Compare two fractions with the same numerator. Then it breaks it out even more. Use visual models, including number lines, to illustrate why fractions are the same. Your item specifications from the state can help you with this. So some of these 4 example things I have here are specific examples from those item specs. Now, different work groups of people wrote those item specs, so they're not all created the same. Your teachers have a lot of vetting to do and vertical alignment, because when those were developed at the state, they very much worked in pockets by grade level. They never looked at the vertical alignment, which is something that you need to do if you're engaging in this work, to make sure that it is tight and that work was done correctly, right? Because everybody's doing their best guess. But Those documents can be very helpful to you in unwrapping, but your teachers are, to me, going to have to do an unwrapping of what is that standard, and then what are examples of that, so we can be really clear on proficiency. When it comes to cognitive skills, and I've taken this from Marzano, he has these 9 cognitive skills he talks about that you should be tying in. I think sometimes this can be overwhelming for teachers to think, well, when am I generating conclusions or identifying logical errors? But the point of this is, when a student is unable to do a level 3, we need to be backing up and thinking, well, what cognitive skills do we need to be building up to get them to a 3? So in that level 2.0 on your proficiency scales is where I would really be considering, how do we help teachers think through the cognitive skills? And so Marzano is a great place to start. Again, it's not always user friendly to think about sometimes, but can we identify basic relationships between ideas? So for fractions, can we understand the difference between foundational cognitive understanding? There would be, do I understand the difference between a numerator and a denominator, right? That could be the relationship and how that works. Do I understand how fractions go on a number line? You would break apart even more for the level 2. What are the thinking skills and relationships and things kids need to know in order to accept mastery? So those, when you're making your scales, your teachers need to be very cognizant of the cognitive skills students need to know. And again, much more detail in a lot of Marzano's books about those cognitive strategies. Here's an example of what we've done in ours. He always suggests having the vocabulary. We have then, so again, I'm taking this equivalent fractions, greater than, less than, equivalent. And then we're going to say, can your kids do basic things like understand how to compare fractions when they have the same denominator? In our scales, we actually then include a video to show teachers what that looks like, sounds like, because that's sometimes a disconnect. Then can they demonstrate the understanding of what greater than is? 1 to 20. Do they know what less than is? Do they know what equal to is? Can they use visual models to show fractions? Can they plot numbers and fractions on a number line? Do you see how we went through and we helped a teacher think through, if they're not quite proficient, go back to comparing. Can't do that, go back to greater than, less than, and equal to. Can't do that, go back to visual models. If they can't do that, go back to. You're really wanting to help teachers stair step. How do we scaffold those cognitive skills under the level 2.0 to build them up to get there? A lot of sophistication and content knowledge comes into knowing this. But this is the type of work that we need to know in competency-based learning. If I find out you're here, I've got to know strategically how to move you on that continuum. You're not going to move on your continuous MPI points or anything unless teachers have strategic ideas of how to move students along that continuum. And then once you have developed those things on your own proficiency scales, then comes the student clarity. And here's an example of a corresponding student scale. So you can see we've highlighted the difference here. Hey, kiddo, if you're a 4.0, it means you can also do this work with unlike numerators and denominators. But for a 3.0, it has to be the same. And we would want kids to read the difference on a 2 and do the check mark. Can you plot numbers? Can you show visual models? Can you? Where are you on this continuum? And we're showing them, if you're not quite to a 3, here's how you need to back up. So again, if you, foundational work for competency-based learning is understanding your priority standards. So here's suggested next steps. You've got to be diving into those K through 12 priority standards with teachers. You need to be auditing your curriculum right now. Are we aligned to the priorities? Are we ready for that? Do we have clear pacing guides that show when we're going to hit those priorities? And then we're going to have to consider your proficiency scale next steps. Once you have 1 through 3, am I going to be asking my teachers to create those? Okay, then who's going to be on board? What resources? How are we going to get them to the level that I just showed you? Or are you going to outsource with a company who's already created those. That's your decision to make. And then how do we prepare for student assessment capable learners? So it comes to those student scales. What am I going to need? And how are we going to obtain those scales? So here's an example when we talk about pacing. You've got to have a pacing guide where in every unit teachers are clear. Is that priority standard running all the way across, or does it live within a certain unit? You need to have organized, clear pacing, and you need to audit your curriculum and know and ensure that we're hitting every priority and competency, because that's what we're going to be assessed and judged on. You need to determine measurement topics and have these vertical progressions in place. So once we know those, what are the big topics within those priorities? And you need to have those in reading, math, social studies, and science. And then you need to have proficiency scales for each one of those priority standards. Now, this is an example of ours because a disruptor approach that we've taken is we've done those for the state of Missouri. And in order to ensure alignment and proficiency to the state, we have also included a copyrighted template on the right-hand side of here are assessment questions and Missouri examples. So when we have created our scales, we're really looking at that vertical alignment and that alignment to what Missouri says is proficient. And if you're engaging in this work with teachers to writing it on your own, just please, please, please anchor them in these item specs and things from the state, because their interpretation of the standards needs to be the same as the state. And so that's something we've really tried to do with our tools. And then in the level 2, notice how we've really tricked out ours in those cognitive skills that students need, and we have included anchor charts and resources for teachers to help them understand. Again, teacher clarity precedes student clarity. So we want teachers to be very clear of the cognitive skills it would take and how they would build up a student with strategies to get to that level of proficiency. We have digital and hard copy books, but I am going to just share this, and you'll hear more about this from our company. I have some districts who say, hey, we love your tools, but we want to write it. We're just going to buy some of your books to do that. Well, just know it's a copyrighted product, right? So I know that's hard in education, but I think our clients either work with us wholly. If you're a district who's engaging that on work, please, I wouldn't use our work, because then that's going to become a copyright and an intellectual property stealing. And, we have copyrighted that template. So if you're going to engage in this work, I'm trying to give you just the background of what we did to create our strong tools. If you're on this video and you're thinking, hey, we don't want to spend the next 3 or 4 years doing that because we're losing teachers left and right, and this will burn them out. And we also don't think we'll get a quality product, then our company can help you with that. But if you're wanting to engage on this work on your own, then I would go your own way and engage. And that's why we're putting out these videos, to try to help you along the way with how we did create our tools. And we're just taking a different approach because we're really trying to build equity. One of the concerns I have with every school district creating their own is if they're not tightly anchoring themselves and doing vertical alignment checks and feedback, that we're going to be having one school district saying a level proficiency is actually another district's level 2, right? And so these kids are not getting exposed to the rigor that they need to. And that's part of the why behind this work, is we're just trying to make sure all kids in Missouri are exposed to the rigor of what the state standards have said, which has systemically been a barrier in our state. We glance at a standard, or we even unwrap it and still judge it wrong. So we've developed high quality tools to try to help teachers in Missouri do that. You have great organizations. So if you're wanting to do this work, turn to your local RPDCs to help you. They have Marzano trained teachers who can help you with that if you're wanting to take a different approach. So in conclusion, this was just a high level overview, trying to help you see through what am I going to need to have in place as you start planning your next 2 to 4 years. To continue your learning journey, I would suggest going to the Student Success Ready work group. See if it'll pop up here. They have all of the notes and things from their meetings, podcasts, PowerPoints. You could definitely take a look at that and stay informed with what they're learning there. You could sign up to try to be on one of those pilot groups. I think that would be a great next step. Okay, that's going to close out. So I will too. And then just stay tuned to our network. We're going to continue to try to bring you little nuggets. Today was just a 101. You're going to see opportunities where we're going to be leveraging our network to possibly do some leader collaborations. If you want to do an online book study with administrators across Missouri, we're hopefully going to bring that opportunity to you. We're going to be offering more asynchronous and synchronous courses for career ladder and for building leadership teams, instructional coaches. We're really trying to think outside the box. How do we personalize learning for you? How do we understand competency-based personalized learning if we're not modeling it as leaders? And so our company is really trying to take the lead in that. So hopefully stay tuned. You'll see more things around this area, and we're going to be trying to demonstrate more ways to personalize learning and provide you that information as well. I hope that today was helpful and that it gave you a little glimpse into what competency-based learning and education could look like, sound like. If you have any questions or you want to look more deeply at some of our tools and approaches, we would be happy to help you with that. Thank you and have a great day.